Hi, today we're going to talk about Introduction to Machine Sewing. So the first thing to understand is that there's actually hundreds of different types of sewing machines, and every sewing machine is just a little bit different. So we have been using these, we call them Little Brothers. The brand is Brother. It's a computerized version, so it has all of these different stitches. It's got a variety of different feet. I love it because it's great for quilting and garment making and can handle slightly thicker fabrics. But you're going to be using whatever machine is available to you or whatever machine you deem is right for the type of sewing you're going to do. So no matter the machine, the first thing that we recommend is that you print out your manual. So if it came with a manual, great. If it didn't, find it online. There's lots of free resources to getting it. Print it out and read it. Grab a highlighter, grab a pen, grab some mini sticky notes, and find the useful bits and make sure that you have access to them. And we'll talk a bit about the pages that we love best. So not every machine manual is created equal. I love reading manuals, and some are better than others. So this particular manual is really great. The pages that we start in the beginning of getting to know your machine and what your machine is capable of, and the different attachments that it may come with or may just have available at a later date. You're going to figure out how. It's going to tell you how to change the needle, how to thread it, how to wind your bobbin, but we'll walk through that a little bit as well. But find out the specifics for your machine. The other page that we always love to dog ear is the section that talks about the types of stitches. So it'll walk you through what the stitch is going to look like, which foot attachment you're going to use, and all different little notes about maybe what kind of needle you'll need, how to arrange the fabric for that type of stitch. So that's a really great page. And then some manuals have good troubleshooting guides and some don't. So we actually made our own, which you can find free online. It's really great to have on hand because no matter what, everybody hits snags and thread barfs and needle breaking every once in a while, and it's great to just have that cheat sheet to be able to go back to and say, okay, where do I start? How do I get back to trying to make my machine go well? Because very often, too, people get stuck with tension not being right and they assume their machine is broken, and sometimes it just needs to be cleaned. So we'll talk about those again at the end. We're going to start with talking about the parts of the machine. And sometimes it's a little bit like seeing the forest through the trees, but we're going to start with the forest and then we're going to talk about the trees. So we're going to go through the different parts. It's okay if you don't understand them now, but just so that you have the vocabulary in your head. So you'll unpack your machine or take it out of whatever home it's living in, dust her off, say hi to her, give her a name if you want to. We love our machines, and this is, we have a lot of different machines here, but this is the home basic sewing machine that we use, and we call it the Little Brother, and because the brand name is Brother, and it's a computerized version, which means it'll have this computerized plate, and often older models, or ones that just aren't computerized, will have knobs for these things as well. So we'll talk about that as we go. So you'll have a power cord. Make sure everything is secure and that it's plugged in. Sometimes that can be the #1 problem. You'll have your foot pedal. So this is what will drive the machine along with the hand crank up here. And you can see that the needle is moving as you turn this, so are the feed dogs. So you have this little knob right here is what holds your spool of thread. And I love this machine because a lot of beginner machines will actually give you, and more advanced ones, I love that they're printing on these machines too. We'll very often write on our machines with permanent marker, just our own little cheat sheets, but it's great when they have their own built in. And so it'll tell you how to thread it if you're going straight to needle threading or if you're winding your bobbin. So you've got your thread spool, you've got your thread guides depending on where you're going. This will be your bobbin winder, and it'll move if you're actually winding your bobbin, or it'll go back. You've got where your thread goes. This is your needle thread tension disc. So this coordinates to a set of discs in here that determines how much pressure and resistance the thread has through all of this. So basically set it at a nice 4, or whatever your machine tells you is your even place to start. So you go through, there's a lever in here that's your thread uptake lever. So this one will move your thread up and down nice and cleanly. So your thread goes through here, this is a little thread guide, and then you'll thread your needle. A lot of machines will have a needle threader. I love Brothers needle threaders. A lot of other machine varieties don't have quite as nice ones that are easy to use. This one's really great. It makes threading your needle a breeze. So then you have your different foot attachments. This is your presser foot. This is what holds your fabric down. This little knob will raise it and lower it. So if you're putting your fabric in or you're done sewing, it releases the tension. You can pull it out. You can put it down and keep going. One thing I love about Brother is not only this little model specifically of Brother is that it's great for quilting and garments as well. I really love that the presser foot lever is right here. Some, especially quilting ones, where you're not lifting it up and down as often, is kind of in the back, and so it takes a little bit more time to use, whereas this one is real easy to just lift it up and down. Your machine should come with different feet, or at least talk about different options for feet, in which you can do a variety of different things. And there's a little clip in the back where you can press it and take it out real easy and put it back in there, lower it down, you can hear click again, it's all set. So you have your needle, your little screw for changing out your needles. You can come in here to your bobbin, your needle plate, which is this whole thing. In here is your bobbin. Every machine has different bobbins as well. Some of it is the same, but you're really going to want to know. You can't use every bobbin in every machine, so that really is particular to your machine. So you can pull out your bobbin. What I also love about this particular machine is that it's really easy to clean. You can actually take off this plate really easily. You can take out your bobbin case and you can get in there, because you'll see on our troubleshooting guide, one of the first things is just lint in your bobbin case. Just that can cause your tension to go haywire. You can end up with thread barfs and nests, and you think you're doing something wrong, but really you just got to clean your machine. So get that out of there. This one's great too, because it'll give you little arrows to line up with little dots, so it's really easy to get back in there. So we're going to leave the bobbin out because we're going to wind it next. So that's basically everything. This does have the ability to take off this little pocket, which will, is a great place to house some of your feet if you have extra attachments. It also creates this free arm. This one is a bit wide of a base, but you can get a jean leg in here. You can't necessarily do arms of garments, but if they're a little wider, you can, flannel, stuff like that. So this gives you a little bit more options for garments. It also has a detachable flatbed that's great for quilting and stuff that you're sewing that's flat. There's different stitches, different types of stitches that this machine comes with. Every machine is a little different. This is the speed at which you're sewing, which is also a really great beginner tool, because your instinct sometimes is to let the machine run, but that's how you make mistakes. And if you're not comfortable there, it's so nice to be able to drop the speed down so that you can press it at max, but the machine's not actually going to be going very fast. This one has a great needle up-down button, a reverse button, and a forward stitch button. Let me turn around actually so we can watch it. this you have, well, the computerized ones will have great little error codes. It's telling you this because your presser foot's not down, so it's not going to let you go in reverse if your presser foot's not down. Because in order for everything to work right and the machine to actually feed your fabric through, your presser foot has to be down. So that's what it was warning me against. So you can press that and it'll go backwards, which is a really great feature for being able to tack when you start and stop stitching something. So in the computerized version, you get to pick what stitch you're doing, then you get to pick the stitch length, which is how far apart your stitches are, and your stitch width for zigzag stitches where it's, you know, do you want little tiny stitches that you're using for applique? Are you mending something that you want to make sure you're getting a big chunk of, you want to go all the way over into the hole? You know, if you have a jean hole like this and you're patching it, you want to make sure you get good jean material with the new patch one and you're going over real big like that sometimes. Or just decorative stuff. So that is the nuts and bolts of the machine parts. Next, we're going to talk about winding the bobbin. So we're going to wind the bobbin now, and what's great to understand first is the mechanics of the machine. You have an upper thread, and then you have a lower thread, which is your bobbin. And then the needle is creating a lock stitch between the two. So the needle's coming down, it's grabbing the bobbin thread, it's coming back up, and the needle has the top thread. And so then you're creating this lock stitch where there's a knot in the middle. So your tension, we'll talk about later, is where that knot ends up in terms of the fabric that you're stitching through. So our bobbin is our bottom thread, and our spool is our top. So we're going to put our thread on that top spool. We're going to wind it around this thread guide like it tells us to. And there's a hole in a lot of bobbins, and we're going to guide it up through the hole so that as it winds, it's winding in this middle section of the bobbin. We're going to plunk her down. We're going to move it over because that tells the machine that we're winding the bobbin and not stitching through fabric. Although your needle will continue to go up and down. So make sure your hands are out of the way and that your fabric that you're sewing through isn't there either. So I like to hold the top thread to make sure it's nice and tight. Otherwise, if you let it loose, it can get wrapped up in here and it's a mess to deal with. So we're going to go ahead and press down on the presser foot and get it started. And I like to keep holding on to it until we've stitched quite a bit. And then you can just go ahead and clip that right off and let her go. It's important while you're winding your bobbin to make sure that it's winding evenly, because if you end up with, you know, a chunky part at the bottom and not a lot of thread at the top, you're going to run into problems sewing later. So sometimes if I notice that it's not winding evenly, I'll just use my finger to help kind of guide it and straighten it out so that you can see the bobbin filling in nice and flat. We do a lot of sewing, so I like a nice full bobbin. But if you're using a funky color that you're just doing a couple stitches with, sometimes it's fine to just wind it a couple times. But, or just, you know, just a little bit. But there's nothing worse than getting to the last few inches of your sewing project and running out of bobbin thread. That is the worst. Okay. We're just going to call that done. We're going to pop it off. We're going to open up the bobbin case. And this machine also has really great instructions for loading the bobbin, which I appreciate. You're going to make it look like a pea. You're going to stick it in there. And then you're going to follow this guide for where your thread goes. It goes up like this, around this thing, and then it has this handy thread cutter. And that's it. Your bobbin is wound. Clip that back into place. Now we're going to thread our top thread. And we're going to follow the guide that it has up on top as well. So it says step 1 through this thread guide. Step 2, we're going to go down. We're going to go up to the thread uptake lever. We're going to go back down to this needle thread guide right here. And then again, I really love Brothers needle threader. We're just going to, there's a hook, a tiny hook in there, so you got to make sure it catches on the hook. And you pull it and make sure your thread, well, it's just great practice to go up, down, and then back up again and catch your bobbin thread and get that tail out of there as well. Because sometimes just starting, you can hit a lot of problems if you're not taking up that bobbin thread right away. So get your bobbin thread up, get your tails out of the way, and you're ready to go. So once your thread is in place, you're going to find the top thread guide and bring it down through where the tension discs are. You're going to find a guide at the bottom and back up through the thread uptake lever. Bring it back down. There's going to be a guide near your needle. Pop that in place. Thread your needle however is most comfortable, by hand or with your machine needle threader. Pop the thread through the back of the foot. Get your bobbin. Slide your bobbin in however your machine is made to do that, whether it's a top or a side loading. Put the cover in place and you're set to go. So now we're going to talk about practicing sewing. I'm going to put my foot pedal on the ground. We have it all threaded. We've got the bobbin in there. We are just going to start with a straight stitch at the settings that it automatically has when it starts up. So this machine has different needle positions as well. So the first two stitches has to do with needle positions, and it depends on if you want your needle to the left or the center. We're going to do center so that we know that as we're guiding our fabric, and we're going to practice on paper first, that our needle is going to go right in the middle of this foot. So starting with just a piece of paper is a great way to go, and you don't even have to have it threaded and waste thread if you don't want to. You can just take a piece of blank paper, and your machine should go through cardstock too, and that will just, you might have to change tensions, but we're going to practice tension anyways. So with your sheet of paper, try some stitches, or some patterns that you're going to follow with your stitches, and so that you just can get used to different, different curves, different styles of sewing, how to hold your fabric and guide it through. So, oh, and maybe I forgot to even mention, there's feed dogs in here too. There's so many different parts of the machine. So with your presser foot holds your fabric down, and then your machine also has these feed dogs down here that work at the same time to grip your fabric and pull it through. So everything's working together to move your fabric through. So with your hands, you're just guiding it along. So we're just gonna fold that to get it out of the way. And when I am sewing, I use I go a couple forward, and I'll go a couple backwards to lock it all in place, and that creates a really secure hold. Otherwise, if you're just doing a running stitch, those threads can easily just come undone because you're not knotting it, essentially. So then just practice going straight. But if you're practicing, don't necessarily worry about going straight, or going, go straight. Try to go straight. Don't worry about locking that stitch and back stitching when you start and stop right away. So if that feels good to you, increase the speed a little bit. And practice really keeping where you want to stitch in the middle. So then when you're done, so I should mention, a lot of machines will either, when you stop, the needle will be down, and this is so you can easily pivot and turn a corner and continue sewing. Because if you try to sew and your needle's up and you lift your presser foot in order to pivot, all of a sudden you're in the wrong spot. So that is a really handy feature for depending on what you're going to sew. So there's that. And you can tell, see when we were going nice and slow and we lined up perfectly and then I increased the speed and now all of a sudden we're over here? It doesn't pay it to go fast sometimes. And then we're going to start on the curve and you'll get used to it. Here, we'll drop it down. And you'll really get to know how fast you need to guide the fabric through. So this is a great place to just start and get comfortable with how fast you want to go, if you're creating good stitches, and just getting used to your machine. So I also recommend, with whatever fabric you're going to sew, test scraps together and be able to check your tension. Your tension is where your top thread and your bottom thread meet together in that knot. So it'll change depending on the thickness of the fabric, the weights, how the machine's pulling through. There's lots of little variations, but if you start with something easy, it'll be rather painless. So we will talk about tension next. So now we're going to talk a bit about tension. Tension is important because if it's not set right, then your stitches can come undone really easily. So what we have to start are 2 quilting weight cottons. There's not a lot of stretch on them. They're not going to move a lot on their own. They're really easy to sew with. So whenever we sew, we get right sides together. And I already cut these with a rotary cutter, so I'm just going to line up the straight edges. I'm picking the wrong edge. And I'm not going to pin these because we're just practicing today and it's just a little bit. And we can talk more about pinning in a different video. So now they're all together, and I'm going to line up the raw edge of my fabric with whatever guide that I want for the correct seam allowance. Your seam allowance is the distance between the raw edge of the fabric and where your stitches are going to go. Typically with quilting it's about 1/4 inch, with garments it's 5/8, because you really want to make sure that you're catching all those layers of fabric. And oftentimes garment fabrics are very expensive and you don't want to mess that up. So what I'm going to do is actually just pick a spot and I'm going to line up the edge of my fabric with the edge of the foot. So we're going to put down our presser foot and then we're going to start going. I'm not going to worry about back stitching right now because we're just kind of getting the hang of it. So now we're going to go, and this is already set up with whatever tension it came with. It gives you this handy knob for changing your upper thread tension. You can change your bobbin tension, but especially as a beginner, we don't recommend it. It's often set well for what it is, and it's best to just start tinkering with your upper thread tension. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of get all the way to the top. We're going to do a little bit. Now I'm going to go back to the middle. Now we're going to go all the way to the other end. And we're going to stop there. I'm going to bring our needle back up, bring up your presser foot, take the tails, and I love this machine. It barely, you can't tell a lot from the top where the tensions are changed, but you can from the bottom. And what happens with your thread tension is that if you have it nice and even, it should, especially with 2 pieces of quilting weight cotton, nothing funky going on there, your knot should be in the middle of the fabric. So you're not going to see it on the wrong, or on your bottom fabric, and you're not going to see it on your top fabric. It should be right in the middle. So if you start, we're going to check out the back of these, or we're going to check out these stitches. If you start to notice that your knot is on your lower fabric and you can see it down the bottom, what you're going to do is actually increase your upper tension. You're going to bring it back up. If your knot is at the top, you're going to bring it back down. You're going to say, knot, go back down there. So that's how I remember how to tinker with the tension. So we're going to check out the tension on the stitch we just ran, and it's hard to tell on these smaller stitches for sure. And from the top, it maybe doesn't look so bad, but you can especially tell on that last section where we brought the knot all the way down by decreasing the upper thread tension. And on the back of the fabric, you can see the knot, and it kind of looks like that bobbin thread is just a loose tail. And you can see if we clip from about where we started doing that, you can actually just pull that out completely because you've brought that knot all the way down to the bottom of the fabric. So you're basically just, it wasn't really even holding on to the bobbin thread. Whereas if we go back to where we started and had the tension that the machine was already set to, clip that a little bit. So even if it's clipped, you still can't really tug it out. And that's why it's called a lock stitch, because it locks it right in the middle as long as your tension's fine. So that's a bit about tension and seam allowance. I'm going to show you a zigzag stitch next that you can use to encase the raw edge. And then we'll talk over the troubleshooting guide. So now we're going to talk briefly about the different types of stitches that this has, and really we're not going to go over a ton. So you've got your straight stitches. You move next into this funky lightning shaped zigzag is a stretch stitch. So typically home machines are not super great with stretch fabric, with knits and fabrics that stretch, because you just have the lower feed dogs that are guiding the fabric through, and especially if you have 2 layers of that stretchy stuff, it just doesn't feed really well. Sometimes you can use a walking foot attachment to get over that, but it gets pretty tricky. So you can do it, but we'll talk about that in a different video. So you've got your stretch stitch, you've got various zigzags, you've got overcasting stitches, which are, if you're using your zigzag to go over the edge of your fabric, like we're going to show you as well, then sometimes those are really great. You've got just all sorts of decorative ones, buttonhole stitches, which are fun, and then more decorative ones. So learn your machine, check out your manual. We're just going to go over briefly the zigzag. So it will tell you what number to switch your machine to. We're going to go just to that first one. The 5 is for an extra strong zigzag, which we don't necessarily need today. And it already has preset stitch width and stitch length, and you can figure out whether that's good for you or you want to change it. Zigzag stitches are great for creating really strong seams, so anything that's going to have a lot of wear on it, armpits if you're doing garments, backpacks, stuff like that. And then it's also great for encasing edges and applique, stuff like that. So first I'll just show you what it's going to do zigzag wise on your fabric. It's just going back and forth. I'm going to increase the speed. I'm going to now crank up the stitch length so you can see that difference. And go back down. Stitch a little bit. Now I'm going to really crank up the stitch width so you can see that. So this is the settings that the machine came with for zigzag. This is when we increase the stitch length, so how far apart those stitches are. We went back to normal, and then this is where we increased the stitch width, so how far apart your zigzag was. So now I'm going to go back to the regular settings by stitching away from that pattern stitch and then back to it, and that resets the length and the width settings. So if you're doing garments, or you just want to encase that raw edge, or make sure that it's extra strong so that if some reason that initial stitch gives out, you have an additional one over the raw edges, you can line it up so that, and it's handy, right now our needle position is when the needle is at the right. So we're going to put our presser foot down and line it up so the needle is going to go beyond our fabric, and then the next stitch, when it zigzags back, is going to go into your fabric. And depending on how fussy your machine is, you might have to hold the tails just to get it started so you don't thread barb right away. So then I should slow down, sorry guys. So you can just kind of watch, make sure your needle's going past the fabric and then into the fabric. Up. And you can see right in there that we encased it, so it won't fray anymore. So those are just some basic stitches with your home machine. I would say just get some scraps together and start playing around. Your machine will tell you, you know, you'll learn a lot just by going through your manual and experimenting with the machine that you have. So briefly we're going to talk about the troubleshooting guide, and then you'll be good to go. So now we're going to go over some really great, easy troubleshooting techniques to just make sure that you've got everything in working order. And we have this handy sheet that's free on our website. The first tip is clean your machine. Very often, lint can get built up under the throat plate, and it's important to get these all nice and tidy. So you can use a cotton swab, you can use a pipe cleaner, a small paintbrush, all sorts of stuff to be able to get into this case like we took out before, and make sure that everything's nice and clean and tidy in there. So while you're in there and you've cleaned it out, it's also a nice time to oil your machine. With all those rotating parts, most machines need a little bit of oil every once in a while. Your manual will tell you more about it, and it'll tell you exactly what type of oil to use and where you should put it. One drawback to this machine is that you can't get in here at all, but usually the type of metal that they use doesn't necessarily need a ton of oiling anyways up top. So it is a harder machine to service, but it's a great beginner machine to get to know what types of sewing you want to do. While we are in there too, one of the points is bobbins. There's different sized bobbins for different machines. Make sure that you're using the correct bobbin. Make sure that it's wound the right way when you're putting it in there, and make sure that when you're winding it, like we talked about, that you have a nice even wind to your bobbin. If it's all lopsided, then it's not going to draw up consistently, and you'll run into problems. Another point is the needles. Do you have the right size needle and type of needle for your machine? Do you have the right needle for the type of fabric that you're sewing? And is it a fresh needle? Very often you should change. Needles are cheap, they're easy to find, and if you can read your manual and know what kind you need, it's a great way to just make sure that everything's running smoothly. These tips get really dull. If you try to go through 3-5 layers of denim and you hear a weird clunky noise and you're like, ooh, good thing my machine didn't break, you take it out and the next time you go to use it, you're like, oh, it's just not working right. Maybe I did break it. Sometimes you just bent the tip. You might have like knocked the whole tip off. Sometimes it's bent just a little bit. And if everything doesn't match up nicely, then you're not going to be able to get that stitch that you need. So the next one is threading. Rethread your machine. You'd be surprised how often that, just like electronics in general, turn it off, turn it back on again, and just rethread it. Take out your upper thread completely, take out the bobbin completely, and then put them back in, and oftentimes that takes care of the problem. The other issue with thread is make sure that you're using new quality thread. Cheap threads can create a lot of lint, it can get snagged, sometimes there's little knots or burrs in them that can be a problem. The other thing that it's good to, sometimes you just want to get on your machine and you want to sew, and you're like, well, I don't care if there's a different color in the bottom bobbin, so you'll just start sewing. Color doesn't matter, but types of thread does. So make sure that your top thread and your bottom thread, that the type of thread you're using are the same, because there's different weights to them and there's different ways that it glides through, and if you're using different types of thread, you can really get your stitches and your tension all messed up. So this is a great place to start. I hope that you didn't get too overwhelmed, because we just want you to jump in there and start using it and get comfortable with your machine and learn your own. If you have any questions, reach out. We're happy to help. And watch more of our videos, learn more, experiment more, just jump into it. So thanks for watching.